But first, our top story hits the Texas border again as Texas Governor Greg Abbott imposes inspections at the Port of Laredo, similar to inspections at other ports which have caused massive backups. Noi Mahoney is here to talk about it. And Noi, I talked about this earlier in the week. Tough delays with these new inspections imposed by the state of Texas, and now all of a sudden we have more inspections here at the country's largest port of entry at Laredo.
That's right. The Texas Department of Public Safety began safety inspections Thursday for all commercial cargo trucks coming to the United States from Mexico at the Columbia Solidarity International Bridge, which is part of the port of entry in Laredo, as you mentioned, which is the busiest land port in the U.S. The DPS inspections in Laredo are in addition to commercial commercial safety inspections. The DPS is also doing in El Paso and Tornillo, Texas, and these safety inspections are being blamed for backing up cargo trucks for hours, miles and miles, and stranding as many as 19,000 trucks at the border, holding up about 1.9 billion worth of merchandise arriving in the United States.
So, Noi, obviously this is a pretty big deal because, as we mentioned, Laredo is the nation's busiest land port, not only in terms of traffic, but also in terms of the amount of goods coming through, the value of those goods coming through. We saw the Mexican president send a diplomatic letter to the United States government this week as well, calling the inspections just an absolute hindrance on the movement of goods and really a detriment to both his economy and the United States economy. Has there been any response from the U.S. government so far, or is this now new imposition by Texas maybe enough to trigger that full country response?
Yeah, that's right. As you mentioned a few days ago, Mexican President Andrés Manuel Obrador sent a diplomatic note to the U.S. Criticizing, the Texas DPS inspections. I haven't seen any official response from, the U.S. State Department or any U.S. agency as of yet. U.S. Congressman Henry Cuellar put out a statement yesterday criticizing these DPS checkpoints as unnecessary. And as Cuellar pointed out, which is something I've been trying to point out to more people, which is these DPS safety inspections, they're not inspecting cargo. They're not opening cargo trailers and looking through the cargo for drugs or, contraband or even migrants. What DPS is doing when these trucks cross the border is they're stopping them and checking things like their tire pressure or windshield wipers or brakes. So they're safety inspections. Even though the DPS's stated reason for doing this is to deter cartel activity, these inspections are safety inspections.
Yeah, that's where I was going to get to, because when we had talked, there really wasn't a serious reason as to why these inspections were happening, but that obviously doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're simply checking windshield wipers and thinking that just maybe it's an extra added physical presence to possibly deter someone with not exactly legitimate means or reasons to cross the border. Any other reasons other than that? Just then it's basically an extra level of security, if you will.
I've reached out to Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Texas Department of Public Safety repeatedly, I think about half a dozen times, over the past few months, asking them, how effective are these safety inspections? Have you found any cartel drugs or guns or even migrants? And I've never received a reply from the governor's office or Texas DPS. So it's very curious, to say the least, how effective these inspections are. And I want to point out when trucks come across the border, from Mexico to the U.S., they're inspected by Mexican Customs, and then they're inspected by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The trucks are checked by personnel from the U.S. Department of Transportation. So they're already being inspected by 3 layers of inspections. And now the Texas DPS has added a 4th layer, which many people say is unnecessary.
So one of the things that I learned on this week's episode of Rethink Reshoring with Rosemary Coates, she had taken a trip to Laredo a couple weeks ago. If you missed that episode, go watch it on YouTube. But was that trucks that come from Mexico have, I believe it's a 21-mile radius that they can actually go from the port of entry within Laredo. And that's it. They're limited to that 21 miles. Do we think that this could potentially be a solution if we could see Texas DPS maybe enforce the outer ring of that 21-mile radius or the final landing point of those trucks? Because that takes the inspections away from the border. You're still getting them done, and 21 miles is really not a whole lot of space for something else to happen, right? If they have this really limited radius anyways, is there harm in taking the increased inspection away from the choke point, away from the point of entry, and doing it when the truck ends up where it needs to go?
Well, that definitely makes more logical sense. As you mentioned, it wouldn't create such a choke point for all these trucks trying to cross. I can't speak for the Texas DPS's reasoning. As I said, I've reached out to them, and I've never seen any other answer than that the one they keep putting out is we're trying to deter cartel activity. But it would make more sense, as you mentioned, if they really are interested in increasing safety for these trucks that are being used around Texas, it would make more sense to move the checkpoint further out, which would lessen the impact on backing up trucks at the border. But I haven't seen any comments from DPS that they would consider something like that.
Is there any sort of increased activity from the cartels in northern Mexico that would prompt this, or is this? I'm trying to understand exactly why this is coming up.
I haven't seen any reports of increased cartel violence along, the border, along border cities. That doesn't mean it's not happening, but usually, if there's a big incident where there's a shootout or there's some sort of, violent encounter between law enforcement in Mexico and the cartel, it makes the news. So I haven't seen anything lately other than, as we've discussed, the migrant surge that's been happening all along the U.S.-Mexico border. But that situation, while still impacting border trade, the migrant situation seems to be sort of slowly getting under control. Whereas this Texas DPS inspections, trade operators and everyone from the Mexican president said it's these DPS inspections that are really harming trade right now.
It's going to be interesting to watch and see if the United States ends up responding and taking more of a federal level to this instead of a state level. Noi, thank you for joining us this morning. We will catch up with you soon.
Thank you so much.